It started with a knock at the door and a woman soaked in rain holding two little girls with nowhere left to go. He should have turned them away. He almost did. But what happened next changed everything. If stories of second chances, quiet, courage, and unexpected family mean something to you, stick around. And if it moves you, give it a like. Maybe even subscribe. There's more warmth where this came from. Dry Valley, November. The first rain of winter came without thunder. Just a gray, endless sky and a cold that seeped into your bones. Ethan. Cole sat alone in the kitchen of the old house at the edge of town. The kind of house where silence wasn't just quiet. It had a weight to it. The smell of damp wood and burnt coffee lingered in the air. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a soft yellow light that made everything look older than it already was. His fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. Coffee gone cold, forgotten. The wood stove behind him crackled, filling the room with a warmth that never quite reached his chest. It had been 11 years. 11 years since the fire, since he lost Anna, since the town of Dry Valley had stopped meeting his eyes at the post office. No one ever blamed him out loud, but grief and suspicion were good at sharing the same room. Ethan had rebuilt the house himself. Not to forget, but to survive. The front porch still bore the scorch marks from that night. The kitchen still held the memory of Anna's laughter, sealed in the grain of the wooden cabinets she painted herself. That night, like so many others, he didn't expect visitors, until he saw them. 3 figures, motionless, standing at the gate, barely visible through the blur of rain on the kitchen window. A young woman and 2 small children, all soaked to the bone. She wasn't knocking. She wasn't waving. She just stood there, like someone unsure whether she still belonged in the world. He rose slowly. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Pushing the door open, the cold came at him like a slap. Rain spattered his boots, the wind cutting through his flannel shirt. She turned her face toward him. She was young, 19, maybe 20. Her hair clung to her cheeks in dark, wet strands. Her arms tightened around the 2 girls beside her, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. Twins, he guessed, identical in their wide, frightened eyes and trembling hands. The older one clutched a soggy stuffed bear. The younger girl sneezed. None of them cried. "Do you need something?" Ethan asked more gruffly than he meant to. The woman lifted her chin, not defiantly, just tired. "We've got nowhere to go," she said. I'm sorry to come like this. I just need a place out of the rain. Just tonight." Ethan hesitated. Every part of him screamed, Don't get involved. Don't invite pain back into your house. Don't open the door and feel again." But he looked at the girls. How they clung to her legs, how small they looked against the wind. How she didn't ask for much, just shelter. Just enough human decency to make it through one more cold night. He stepped aside. The woman led the children past him with a quiet, "Thank you," her voice barely above a whisper. Water dripped from their coats onto the wooden floor, soaking into the old rug. The warmth of the kitchen made their breaths fog the air. Ethan shut the door behind them, locking the cold out. For now. He fetched an old quilt from the hallway closet, then paused. This used to be Anna's. It still smelled faintly of lavender. He almost put it back. Instead, he brought it in. The girls sat huddled by the stove now, tiny hands stretched toward the flames. The younger one was already asleep against her sister's shoulder. The older one watched him, wary. Ethan knelt and laid the blanket over them gently. "You're safe here," he said. Then, glancing at the woman, "I'm Ethan." "Lena," she replied. "These are my daughters, Ellie and Grace." He gave a small nod. "You're not from here." "No," she said. "I was living 2 towns over, with my husband's family, until they told me to leave." Her eyes didn't water, but the crack in her voice did something heavier. "He passed in June. They said I was no longer their problem." Silence stretched between them. Ethan had nothing to offer. Not really. Just walls, a roof, a stove, and the faint echo of a family long gone. You can stay in the guest room, he said. It's not much, but it's dry. You can warm up. Lena gave him a quiet, grateful nod. She carried the sleeping girls down the narrow hallway without another word. Ethan stayed in the kitchen. He stood at the window where he'd first seen them, 3 silhouettes against the rain. And then he did something he hadn't done in years. He left the porch light on. Not out of habit, not for Anna, but for them. That night, sleep didn't come easy. From the guest room came the occasional rustle of blankets, a whispered lullaby, the soft murmur of a mother's voice soothing dreams back into place. He sat at the kitchen table, hands around that same chipped mug. Listening, the old house didn't feel as hollow. It didn't feel healed, but it didn't feel empty either. He looked at the stove. The fire still burned. Maybe that was something. And just before the clock hit midnight, a quiet voice from the hallway floated into the room like a secret. Thank you for not closing the door. Ethan didn't sleep. He lay on the worn leather couch in the front room, half covered by an old quilt that smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. Rain tapped the window steadily, like fingers insisting he stay awake. In the stillness of night, he could hear every creak of the house, each one amplified now that he wasn't alone. Down the hallway, behind the closed door of the guest room, were 3 strangers. A girl and her daughters, asleep in a house that hadn't known children's laughter in over a decade. Ethan stared at the ceiling. He could still feel the dampness in the air, the weight of their presence, like a stone dropped into still water, sending quiet ripples through everything he'd tried. So hard to keep untouched. He'd told himself he was done. Done with saving people. Done with hoping. Done with doors. Yet tonight, he'd opened one. It hadn't felt like a choice. It had felt like instinct. Like reaching out when you see someone drowning, whether or not you have the strength to pull them up. And now they were here. He closed his eyes, but his mind was louder than the rain. She said her husband's family kicked her out, said she had no one. Is it true? Or is there more? And what happens when they leave? Or worse, don't? The last time Ethan had let someone in, it had cost him everything. By morning, the rain had slowed to a soft mist. The sky hung low, as if the clouds were too tired to rise. Ethan got up stiffly, his back aching from the couch. He stepped into the kitchen, blinking under the pale, early light filtering through the curtains. The fire in the stove had burned low. He stirred it back to life and put on a fresh pot of coffee. He moved quietly, careful not to wake them. But when he turned toward the hallway, Lena was already there, leaning against the doorframe, wrapped in the same quilt he'd given the girls. Her hair was damp, eyes ringed with shadows. But she stood steady. Sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to intrude. Ethan shook his head. You didn't. She stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, cautious like a stray cat, unsure if it was truly welcome. I didn't sleep much, she admitted, fingers tightening around the edges of the blanket. The girl, they get scared, especially when it's not our place. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, pushed one toward her without a word. She took it, nodded her thanks, then asked, Do you live here alone? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. For a long time now, he said. She didn't press. Instead, they stood in silence. 2 people not yet sure what to do with kindness, letting the warmth of the mugs fill the quiet between them. Then a small voice broke the stillness. Mommy? They turned. One of the twins, Grace, he thought, stood in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, clinging to a worn stuffed bear. Lena crossed the room quickly, knelt, and pulled the girl into her arms. You're okay, she whispered. We're safe. Something in that word, safe, hit Ethan harder than it should have. He watched the moment from a distance, like a man peering into a house he used to live in. When Lena lifted her head, their eyes met. Her voice was quiet but clear. Thank you. For last night. He nodded once, then turned away, pretending to check the fire, to fix the curtain, to do anything that didn't require looking into eyes that saw more than they should. Later that morning, Ethan drove into town for supplies. As he passed the old diner, he noticed the sheriff's truck parked outside. Sheriff Amos, one of the few people who still greeted him by name. Part of him thought about stopping in, telling him what happened, reporting that a young woman and her kids had shown up at his place just in case, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he picked up bread, eggs, some juice for the kids. On the drive back, he caught himself wondering if the girls liked peanut butter, or if they were allergic to anything. He hated that he was thinking about it, hated how quickly these strangers had found their way into the rhythm of his thoughts. He parked in front of the house. It looked the same, quiet, unremarkable, a little weather-worn, but it felt different. Inside, the girls were drawing on old scrap paper with stubby crayons Lena had pulled from her bag. They looked clean, fed, calmer, like flowers beginning to unfold after a storm. Lena stood at the sink washing the dishes she'd used for breakfast. She glanced over her shoulder when Ethan came in. "I figured it was the least I could do," she said. "For the shelter." He didn't answer, just set the grocery bags on the table. She dried her hands on a towel, then faced him. "We'll be gone soon," she said, voice steady. "I'm not here to take anything from you, I just needed one night to keep them safe." He looked at her for a long time. "You think that's what this is?" he asked quietly. "A one-night kind of kindness?" She blinked, uncertain. "Isn't it?" Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm not good at people anymore, and I don't have a lot left to offer." "But you opened the door," Lena said gently. "People don't do that unless they still care. Somewhere." He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. She didn't push. Just picked up the towel again and folded it neatly. The door to the world was still only half open, and Ethan didn't know yet if he was ready to step through it. The table had 4 chairs, but only one had been used in years. It sat at the center of Ethan's kitchen, oak, scarred and steady. Anna had found it at a flea market the summer they married. They'd sanded it down together, painted it a soft sage green, and talked about all the meals they'd share at it. For a while they had. Then the fire came. Then the silence. And eventually, the table became a surface for his coffee mug, the mail and whatever tools he was fixing that week. The other 3 chairs gathered dust like gravestones, but that morning, something strange happened. Ethan brought home a loaf of fresh sourdough and some honey. Without thinking, he set out 4 plates, one for himself, one for Lena, 2 smaller ones side by side. He caught himself mid-motion, frowning at the setting. Old muscle memory, he told himself. That's all. But it wasn't. He knew it. Lena was braiding the girl's hair on the back steps when he called them in. Grace ran in first, arms flapping like wings. Ellie followed, more reserved, still holding that same soaked stuffed bear. Lena wiped her hands on her jeans as she stepped inside. "This smells amazing," she said, her voice lighter than the day before. "Real bread. Haven't had that in weeks." Ethan shrugged. Figured it'd beat cereal. The 4 of them sat around the table, an arrangement that felt both completely natural and entirely foreign. The girls ate like they hadn't in days, laughing between bites, cheeks flushed with life. Lena kept her eyes on them, smiling, one hand on Ellie's shoulder in a way that made Ethan ache. He hadn't realized how quiet his mornings were until now. "How long have you lived here?" Lena asked gently. "Built it myself," Ethan said, "after the fire." She nodded but didn't pry. "The fire?" Ellie asked, her mouth still full. Lena looked alarmed, but Ethan held up a hand. "It's all right," he said. He took a breath. "A long time ago, before you were born." Grace tilted her head. "Was it scary?" "Yeah," he said softly. "It was." The girls fell silent for a moment, then returned to their toast, as if satisfied with the answer. Lena gave him a quiet look, appreciation without words. After breakfast, Ethan stood by the sink, staring at the dishes stacked in the basin. The girls were drawing again, stick figures with bright suns and crooked houses. He didn't know if it was their memory or their imagination. But either way, he couldn't stop glancing at what they made. Lena came up beside him with a towel. "I'll dry." "You're a guest," he said. "And you let strangers in your home," she replied. "Seems we're both bending rules." He gave a small smile, unexpected and short-lived. They stood at the sink, working side by side in an easy silence. Not comfortable, not yet. But something close. That afternoon, Ethan pulled open the door to the shed out back. The wind had knocked it loose again, the hinge moaning in protest. He grabbed his toolbox and brought it to the porch. Ellie followed, then Grace, both barefoot despite the chill. "You building something?" Ellie asked. "Fixing something," Ethan said, kneeling by the step. "This porch has been complaining for weeks. Can we help?" He looked at them, then at the tools, then sighed. "All right." But no fingers near the hammer. The girls sat on the step, watching as he worked. Grace handed him nails one by one like it was a magic trick. Ellie offered advice she'd made up on the spot. When Lena came out 20 minutes later, she paused at the screen door. Her daughters were laughing. Ethan was showing them how to sand down the railing. For a moment, her face softened into something that looked like peace. "You're good with them," she said later when the girls had gone inside. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ethan admitted. "You don't have to," Lena said. "You showed up, that's more than most." He looked at her, wanting to believe her, wanting to believe that showing up, being kind, could be enough. That night, they sat at the table again. No lights but the one over the stove, casting a golden hue over their faces. The house didn't feel empty. The silence didn't echo. After the girls went to bed, Lena lingered. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart," she said quietly, wrapping her fingers around her mug. "Every time something feels good, I wait for it to vanish." Ethan didn't look at her. He stared at the candle she had lit on the table. He didn't know why it was there, but it made the place feel more like home than it had in years. "I used to feel the same," he said. "Still do sometimes." She looked at him, searching. He met her gaze, steady. "This isn't much," he said. "Just a house at the edge of nowhere. But while you're here, I want you to feel safe." Lena's lips parted like she might say something, but then closed again. Instead, she nodded, a quiet, grateful nod. Ethan stood and began clearing the plates. She helped, as she had that morning. As they passed each other in the narrow kitchen, their hands brushed. Just a moment, just skin against skin, but it lingered. And when Ethan turned out the kitchen light that night, he left the table set. 4 chairs, 4 plates, 4 people. For the first time in over a decade, it didn't feel like too much. It felt right. The first snow came quietly. Just a light dusting, barely enough to cover the ground. But it brought a hush to Dry Valley. The kind of silence Ethan remembered from his childhood, before snow meant roof repairs and shoveling driveways, back when it meant fireplaces and hot cocoa, and Anna humming old songs under her breath. He stood by the kitchen window that morning, coffee in hand, watching the flakes drift down like lost feathers. The girls were still asleep. Lena, too, he guessed. They'd been staying 3 nights now. 3 nights. He still hadn't asked her what came next, maybe because he didn't want an answer. That afternoon, he found her on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes on the trees beyond the yard. Bare, branches swayed in the breeze, the sky pale and endless. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Lena didn't turn. "You ever feel like you're not running toward anything, just away from something?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He knew that kind of running, the kind that starts quiet and ends in exhaustion. "I did," he said finally. "For years." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I didn't even take everything when I left. Just what I could fit in the car, diapers, juice boxes, their favorite toys. I didn't plan it, I just walked out." Ethan moved to the steps and sat beside her. Lena went on, voice steady but far away. "After Michael died, everything changed. His parents turned cold, said they did their part, that I was never really one of them. One day his mother came home, and found me folding laundry in the living room, and she looked at me like I was dirt on her carpet. Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said, "You're not his wife anymore, you're just a mouth to feed." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I took the girls and left that night," she said. "No plan, no map. Just kept driving, until the road looked quiet enough to stop." He said nothing, just listened. Because that's what she needed. Not advice, not judgment. Just a place to put the weight. "I used to think if I did everything right, they'd see me," she added. "That love could be earned, that if I was gentle, small, obedient enough, they'd want me to stay." Ethan looked at her now, not the quiet girl from the rain, but a woman who had learned how to survive with grace carved into her bones. "You were too much for them," he said. "Not too little." She turned toward him, startled by the certainty in his voice. "You're still standing," Ethan added. "And they're not here." Lena nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth she'd never dared say aloud. Inside, the girls were giggling about something. The sound floated out through the screen door, soft, high-pitched, untouchable. "I worry about them," she said. "Every minute. I don't want them to grow up thinking love is something you earn by staying quiet." "They won't," Ethan said. She looked at him again, searching. "I don't know what this is," she said softly. "This in-between place. But it's the first time I've felt like I could breathe." Ethan exhaled, long and slow. "Same," he said. That evening, Lena made stew. She moved in the kitchen like she belonged there, barefoot, sleeves rolled, humming under her breath. Ethan watched from the corner as she stirred the pot, checked the biscuits, poured juice into tiny cups. The girls were coloring at the table, their legs swinging off the chairs. The house smelled like rosemary and butter and warmth. When they sat down to eat, Ellie said grace. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she felt like it. A quick mumbled thank you for the food and Mr. Ethan's warm house. Ethan blinked hard, said nothing. Later, as he washed the dishes and Lena dried, she asked quietly, "You ever think about leaving Dry Valley?" "I did once," he said. "Right after the fire. After Anna." He trailed off. Lena waited. "I couldn't do it," he finished. "I felt like if I left, she'd be erased. Like I'd let go of the only proof she ever existed." Lena folded, a towel with careful fingers. "So you stayed in the ruins?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I did. But maybe this house isn't a ruin anymore." He looked at her then. The candle flickered on the table. The chairs were full. The stove was warm. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That night, as the girls slept and snow settled outside, Ethan stood by the kitchen sink, drying the last glass. Lena lingered near the door. "Ethan," she said. He turned. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the roof, for letting me tell it. What I ran from." He gave a small nod. "We all run from something," he said. "But sometimes we run into something better." Their eyes met. There was no romance in it, not yet, just recognition. Two people with ashes in their lungs, learning how to breathe again. The days that followed were still in the way freshly fallen snow quiets the world, still in the way a deep breath settles the chest. Nothing big happened, no decisions, no arrivals, just the steady rhythm of four people sharing space, learning one another's patterns without needing to speak it aloud. Ethan noticed the shift first in the sounds. The house, once ruled by silence, had begun to hum. Little things, the soft patter of feet in the hallway, the clink of spoons against ceramic, the high, bright peal of a child's laugh, filled the corners he hadn't realized had gone hollow. Even the creaking floorboards seemed to creak differently now, like the house was remembering its purpose. Each morning started the same. Coffee, toast, two sleepy girls in oversized sweaters climbing onto chairs they now claimed as their own. Lena would always come in last, hair damp from the shower, eyes soft from whatever dream she hadn't shared. Ethan cooked more than usual. Nothing fancy. Just eggs, biscuits, bacon if he had it. But something about setting the skillet on the stove and hearing it sizzle made the mornings feel anchored, like the day had somewhere to begin. "Mr. Ethan," Grace asked one morning, mouth full of jam, "how come your table only had dust on the other chairs before?" Lena started to apologize for the question, but Ethan shook his head. "It was waiting for company," he said. Ellie tilted her head. "Are we company?" He looked at them, jam on their cheeks, crumbs on their shirts, and felt something tighten behind his ribs. "You're more than that," he said. Afternoons stretched long and soft. The girls built forts from couch cushions. They made up songs. Ethan taught them how to sand wood and hammer nails into scraps he'd pulled from the shed. He let them pick their favorites from the garage: old screws, shiny bolts, a rusted wrench they insisted looked like a robot's hand. "Girls," Lena warned gently one day, "let Mr. Ethan rest." Ethan only shrugged. "I'm good. It's been quiet here too long." He didn't say it aloud, but part of him was afraid of silence now. After getting used to the noise, the stillness might hit too hard. Lena made dinners. She moved in the kitchen, like it had always been hers, adding herbs, tasting broths, humming to herself like the act of cooking was a kind of prayer. Sometimes Ethan would stand at the doorway just to watch her, not because he wanted anything, but because it felt like watching a fire. Steady, warm, mesmerizing. They didn't talk much about the past anymore, not because it wasn't there, but because in those days the present was enough. One night, while the girls were asleep, they sat on the porch under a sky full of stars. Ethan brought out 2 mugs of tea. Lena wrapped herself in an old blanket he offered. "I used to dream of this," she said softly. "This? This kind of quiet, safe, not scary. The kind where I didn't have to listen for slammed doors." Ethan sipped his tea, then asked, "Do you ever miss it? The life before?" Lena was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. Not the people. But the version of me that thought everything was still possible." He nodded. He understood that version of her. He had one too. They sat in silence for a long time, letting the cold bite their cheeks, letting the stars stretch wide above them. When they went inside, Ethan didn't turn off the porch light. He left it burning, like a lighthouse. On the 5th day, something strange happened. Ethan found himself whistling, just a low, tuneless melody while he was stacking wood behind the house. He didn't even notice until Grace, dragging her stuffed bear behind her, stood at the back door and said, "That's a nice song." He chuckled. "Don't know what it is. Just came out." She smiled like it was a secret. Later that evening, as Lena braided the girl's hair and Ethan dried dishes beside her, she said, This feels like a bubble, like something you want to protect with both hands." He nodded. "Yeah." She looked at him then, eyes clear but shadowed. "But I keep thinking, what if it pops?" He didn't answer right away. He wanted to say it wouldn't, that everything would stay exactly like this. But they were both old enough to know better. Instead, he said, "Then we enjoy it while it lasts. And if it breaks, we start again." Lena exhaled slowly, like the thought itself was heavy. "Isn't that what nearly killed you the first time?" she asked. He looked at her then. Really looked. "Yes," he said. "But it's also what's keeping me alive now." She didn't speak after that. Just took his hand, the one not holding the dish towel, and squeezed it once firmly. No promises, no declarations. Just a human connection, warm and fragile, passed between fingertips. That night, as snow began to fall again, the 4 of them sat around the kitchen table, playing a clumsy game of cards Grace had made up. Rules changed every few minutes. Points didn't make sense. But laughter spilled through the house like heat from the stove. Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked around. 4 chairs, now used every day. 4 voices filling the air. 4 hearts, trying to remember what safety felt like, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan wasn't waiting for it to end. The first sign was the truck, an old dented Chevy with rust curling along the wheel wells. It rolled past the house just after sunset, slow and deliberate. Ethan saw it from the porch where he'd stepped out to shake snow from his boots. The truck didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. But Ethan caught a glimpse of the driver, and something in his gut went cold. He didn't say anything that night. Not to Lena, not to the girls. The house was warm, dinner was on the stove, and laughter still echoed in the kitchen. He told himself it was nothing. A wrong turn. A stranger, but he'd seen too much of the world to believe in coincidences. The next day, he asked Lena casually, "What did Michael's people drive?" She paused, her hands still in the sink. Michael had an old Chevy, white, like an 88 or 89, I think. Ethan nodded, pretending to be focused on his coffee. She looked at him, her back tense. "Why?" He shrugged. "Thought I saw one drive by. Might be nothing." Lena dried her hands. Or it might not. Ethan didn't respond. But when she turned away, he glanced at the coat rack. The shotgun behind the door was unloaded. That changed before noon. It happened 2 nights later. A knock at the door. Sharp, impatient, familiar in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. The girls were brushing their teeth. Lena was in the hallway, towel in hand. She froze. 3 knocks. Then a voice. "Lena." She looked at Ethan. He didn't say a word, just moved to the door and opened it 3 inches. The man on the porch was wet, angry, and very drunk. Dark hair, broad shoulders, leaner than Ethan, but coiled with the kind of tension that only comes from someone who's always expecting to fight. He reeked of gasoline and beer. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said. "Didn't think you had it in you. Running off in the night like a thief." Ethan didn't open the door any wider. "You need to leave." The man's eyes moved past Ethan, trying to see inside. "Who the hell are you?" "Friend." "Yeah? She's got plenty of those now?" His voice slurred, but the venom was clear. "You think taking her in makes you a hero?" "No," Ethan said calmly. "It makes me human." The man took a step forward. "I want to see my daughters." "You're not on any paperwork," Ethan said. The man laughed, harsh and hollow. "I'm their blood." "I know what you are," Ethan replied, and this time his voice dropped low. Steady, cold. "And I know what you did. Now back off my porch." The man looked like he might push it. For a second, Ethan's hand tightened around the edge of the door. Then a voice came, from behind him. "Ellie's crying," Lena said, her voice trembling. "Please don't let him in." Ethan stepped forward, closing the door behind him. They stood face to face under the porch light, the wind whistling past them like the whole world was holding its breath. "I'm not going to hit you," Ethan said quietly. "But if you come here again, if you threaten her or those girls, I will end this, whatever way I have to." The man stared at him. Drunk, yes, but not stupid. He spat into the snow. "This isn't over." "It is if you're smart." The man turned, stumbled back to his truck, and peeled off into the dark. Ethan stood in the cold for a long moment, his breath heavy in the air. Then he stepped back inside and locked the door. Every bolt. Lena stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. He walked over, stood close, but didn't touch her. "Are you all right?" "No." "Good," Ethan said, "because I'm not either." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when your chest is still tight and your hands are still shaking. Ethan looked toward the girls' room. They didn't see him, did they? "No," Lena said. "Just heard." He nodded, ran a hand through his hair, then paused. "I'm not going to let him near them." "I know," she said, "but he won't stop, not after tonight." "Then we don't give him the chance." She stepped toward him then, slowly, hesitantly, And for the first time since she arrived, Lena put her arms around Ethan. Not tightly. Not desperately, just enough. Enough to be held. Enough to stay standing. His arms came up around her gently, her head against his chest. Her breath hitched once, then steadied. "I was doing fine," she murmured. "Until he showed up, I really thought we were safe." "We are," Ethan said. "We just have to fight for it now." Later that night, Ethan sat on the front porch, shotgun across his lap. The snow had stopped falling. The air was sharp and clear. He didn't feel brave. He felt old. Worn. But not afraid. Not anymore. Behind him, in the glow of the kitchen window, he saw Lena putting the girls to bed. Saw the candle still flickering on the table. Saw life, small, fragile, but his. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place he was willing to defend. The fire came just before dawn. Not with a roar, but a crackle, a whisper, the unmistakable scent of smoke threading its way through old wood and morning stillness. Ethan woke to it. At first he thought it was part of a dream, a memory clawing its way into consciousness. But the smell, the bitter, acrid sting of it, pulled him fully awake. He sat up, heart hammering. Smoke was seeping under his bedroom door. Then he heard it, Lena's scream. "Ethan!" He was out of bed before her voice faded. The hallway was already thick with haze. He reached the girls' room first. Lena was there, coughing, trying to lift both children at once, their arms tangled in blankets in fear. He didn't ask questions. Just grabbed Ellie, shoved the door open, and shouted, "Go! Outside!" The front of the house was still clear, but not for long. Flames licked up from the porch, orange and hungry. The fire was in the walls. Ethan held Ellie close and led the way. Lena followed, barefoot, Grace clinging to her neck. They pushed through the door into the icy dark, stumbling across the yard. The snow had melted in places, but patches of it still crunched underfoot. From a distance, the fire looked almost beautiful, an angry crown on the rooftop. But Ethan didn't see beauty. He saw memory. He saw Anna's face. He saw the same orange glow that took everything once. He turned to Lena, eyes stinging. "Get them to the truck. I'll check the back, see if anything can be saved." She grabbed his arm. "No, don't go back in." "There might be time." "There's not." Their eyes locked, hers wide with fear, his burning with resolve. Then, the wood behind the house cracked like a gunshot. It was the shed. Flames had spread there too. The porch, the workshop, the space he'd built with his hands, the history in every nail, every tool, all of it going up in smoke. He could barely hear the girls crying from the truck, could barely feel the cold on his skin. He only heard the thud of his boots across the snow and the thunder of his own heart. The fire didn't wait. It climbed fast, faster than last time, like it remembered him. He made it to the shed and kicked the door open, hoping to grab the gas can, the fire extinguisher, anything. But the heat hit him like a fist. It drove him back, blistering, pushing him to the edge. He stood there for a second, caught between instinct and memory, body rigid. And then, "Ethan!" Lena's voice cut through the smoke. Not pleading, not angry, just full of fear. For him. That's what broke him. Not the flames. Not the heat. Her voice. He turned and ran. Back across the yard. Back to the truck. Back to where Lena stood barefoot in the snow, her arms around the girls, all three of them shaking. Not from cold, but from almost losing him. He reached them and dropped to his knees. The girls flung their arms around him without hesitation. He held them close, hands on their backs, their hair. Lena crouched beside him, touching his face, his arms, checking for burns. "I told you not to go back," she whispered. "I couldn't lose it again," he said, voice rough. "We're not things you can lose," she said. "We're people. We're here." He looked at her, snow clinging to her lashes, skin glowing in the light of the flames behind them. "I thought I'd stopped caring," he said. "But I was wrong." "You care too much," Lena said softly. "That's why it hurts." Then she did something she hadn't done before. She kissed his forehead, not like a lover, like someone sealing a vow, quiet, intimate, final. Behind them, the house crackled and hissed, the roof beginning to cave. The old oak table, the warm kitchen, the promise of peace, all of it, gone. But as Ethan pulled them tighter, he realized something else. Not everything had burned. The sheriff's truck pulled in just as the sun crested the hills. Flames still raged, but there was nothing left to save. Amos jumped out, took one look at the scene and muttered a curse. He knelt beside Ethan. "Are you hurt?" Ethan shook his head. "We're all right." Lena stepped forward, voice shaking. "It wasn't an accident." The sheriff's face hardened. "You think it was him?" "I know it was," she said. "He threatened us 2 nights ago." Amos looked at Ethan. "You want to press charges?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked back at the burning house. "No," he said. "I want him gone. I want him out of our lives. Permanently." Amos nodded. "I'll take care of it." The girls were quiet now, huddled in a blanket in the back of the truck. Ethan watched them, noticed how they kept looking toward the smoke and then toward him, like they were checking that everything hadn't vanished all at once. Lena sat beside him on the tailgate. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "You lost everything. Again." He turned to her, reached for her hand. "No," he said. "This time, I didn't lose what mattered." She squeezed his fingers. Hard. And this time, they didn't let go. The house still smoldered for 2 days. Even after, the flames were gone. The earth around it remained blackened, steaming in patches. A few brave planks still stood upright like soldiers who'd refused to retreat. But mostly it was rubble. Wet ash, shattered glass, melted memory. Ethan stood there at dawn, boots sunk in the soft earth, smoke curling around his ankles like ghosts. He hadn't spoken much since the fire. He barely slept, just kept showing up to the wreckage each morning, looking for something. Lena watched him from the distance. She didn't push. She didn't try to fill the silence. She just kept the girls close, kept the borrowed trailer tidy, kept the coffee warm on the camp stove Sheriff Amos had dropped off. There were things she wanted to say, but some wounds weren't ready to be spoken to yet. On the 3rd day, the first knock came. Old man Harris, the retired carpenter from down. The road showed up in his rusty pickup with a bundle of tools in the back. "Thought you might need a hammer," he said, voice flat as ever. Ethan blinked, confused. "For what?" "To rebuild," Harris said. "Or break things. Up to you." Then he stepped out, dropped the tool belt at Ethan's feet, and walked around to inspect the debris like it was just another job. That afternoon, a box of groceries arrived, left silently on the edge of the property. No note. Just fresh eggs, bread, canned soup, and a folded pair of kids' mittens. Then Martha, the diner owner, stopped by with hot chili and cornbread. She didn't say anything about the past. Just handed Ethan the pot and said, "Warm it slow. It's better that way." By the end of the week, the town that had once looked away when Ethan passed was now looking toward him, with hammers, with paint, with pies, and with presents. Ethan sat on the tailgate one night, staring at the half-cleared plot of land. Lena sat beside him, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Did you ever think they'd come?" she asked. "No," Ethan admitted. "I didn't think I deserved them." Lena tilted her head. "Do you still believe that?" He let the question hang in the air, looking at the work in progress before them. Some foundation had been cleared. New lumber had been delivered. Harris had started framing a wall that morning. The bones of a house. "I don't know what I believe," Ethan said slowly. "But I believe in showing up, and they did." Lena smiled, faint and tired. "So did you." That night, under a sky scattered with stars, Lena pulled out something small and unexpected. A potted sapling. Tiny. Frail. Green. "A woman at the feed store gave it to me," she said. "Said every home needs a tree with a story." Ethan knelt beside her as she dug into the soft earth. "What kind is it?" he asked. "A promise tree," she said with a little smile. "Technically, it's just a pear, but if we call it a promise, maybe it'll grow stronger." They planted it in the corner of the yard, not far from where the back porch used to be. When they were done, the girls came over with red string and tied a bow around the thinnest branch. Ellie whispered, "So it doesn't forget who we are." Grace nodded solemnly. "So it remembers to stay." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was the strange quiet of a man who had lost everything and still found himself standing. Not whole, maybe, but alive, with people who had stayed. He walked outside. The tree caught the moonlight just enough to glint silver where the string wrapped around its branch. The girls had named it Hope. Lena had written it on a wooden stake and planted it in the dirt beside the roots. He touched the bark gently. Then he heard the screen door creak. Lena stood there, barefoot, in one of his old flannel shirts. She didn't speak, just came beside him and took his hand. They stood like that for a long time, facing the charred horizon and the tiny green thing that dared to grow from it. After a while, Lena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I keep thinking about what you said," she whispered. "What part? That you thought you didn't deserve them? The people, the second chance." He said nothing. "But you do," she said, and then softly, "So do I." Ethan turned toward her. The moonlight caught her hair, her eyes, the faint smudge of ash. On her cheek she hadn't wiped clean. "I don't know how to start over," he said honestly. "You already did," Lena whispered. "The moment you opened the door." And in the stillness of that night something clicked into place. Not loudly, not like a movie. Just a soft shift. A beginning. By mid-December, the promise tree had survived 3 frosts and 1 heavy snowfall. It was barely 3 feet tall, its trunk thin and unsure. But it held, and that was enough. Each morning, Ethan walked past it with a mug of coffee, and every time he paused, just for a moment. Sometimes he adjusted the red string the girls had tied to its lowest branch. Other times he just looked, as if waiting for it to speak. The house, or what would become the house, had begun to take shape again. Harris and his 2 sons showed up every morning by 8, never late, never loud. Martha sent sandwiches in wax paper, and the sheriff stopped by twice a week, not to talk about the arson case, though it was still pending, but to offer tools, nails, gloves. The town wasn't saying sorry with words. They were saying it with wood and labor and quiet loyalty. And Ethan was learning how to accept that kind of love. It didn't come naturally. Every offer of help scraped against something old in him, pride maybe, or fear. But each day he said yes, it got a little easier. His hands still remembered how to build. His back still ached after long hours, but the pain felt useful, again. Earned. Lena and the girls were still living in the borrowed trailer out back. It was cramped, barely warm, and the stove smelled funny when it ran too long. But it had windows and laughter inside. Most evenings, Lena cooked dinner over the camp stove, and they all ate around a makeshift table, plywood balanced on crates covered in a red checkered cloth. The girls had drawn flowers and suns and stick figure families on it with marker. "This is our art table," Grace declared one night, proudly pointing at a crooked heart she'd drawn with her name inside it. Ellie leaned closer. "We should put everyone's names," Lena smiled. "Even Mr. Ethan?" "Especially Mr. Ethan," Ellie said without hesitation. Ethan didn't say much, just swallowed hard and handed them a marker. They wrote his name in blue, right beside theirs. A few nights later, Harris handed Ethan a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with the precision only decades of practice could give. It read, "The light in the kitchenest." This winter, Ethan stared at it, fingers tracing the letters. "It's what Martha says," Harris grumbled. "That house of yours, even when it was falling down, always had a light in the window. She said it gave people something to believe in. Figured it deserved a sign. Ethan nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Thank you. You're putting it above the new door, Harris added. Non-negotiable. So he did. And when the first snowfall of Christmas week came, the sign caught the morning light just right. Wood glowing gold in the sun, frost clinging to the carved edges like lace. The girls helped plant lavender by the porch. Ethan built them a swing from leftover beams and hung it from the only old tree that survived the fire. Its bark was cracked and blackened, but the branches still reached. Lena painted the new front door blue, a soft, welcoming shade. She chose it without asking. Ethan didn't mind. He liked that she had opinions about colors now. One morning, as they stood side by side surveying the almost finished home, Lena broke the silence. This house, she said, feels more like mine than any place I've ever lived. Ethan looked at her, at the girls chasing each other in the frost-dusted yard, at the smoke rising from the chimney of a home still missing its trim. It feels like mine too, he said. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper. He handed it to her without a word. It was a deed. He had added her name. Lena stared at it for a long time, her mouth slightly open, fingers trembling. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I know, Ethan said. That's why I did. She stepped closer, eyes shining, with something too big for words. You don't owe me anything, she said. I know, he said again, then softly. But I want to build something that lasts, not just with wood, with you. Later that day, as the sun set behind the pines, Ethan stood beside the promise tree. It looked taller now. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just the way it stood, straighter, firmer, belonging. He reached down, tied a new piece of red string beside the old one. Then the girls came running, giggling, carrying a small sign they'd made from cardboard and tape. They'd written in crayon, "Our family tree." They planted it beside the sapling, crooked and perfect. Lena walked up behind them, her hand finding Ethan's. He didn't look at her, just squeezed. The air was cold, but the yard felt warm. It was Christmas Eve when the lights came on. Not just a string of bulbs on the porch, though those twinkled faintly under a thin veil of snow. Not just the fire in the hearth, though that crackled soft and steady, warming the house from the inside out. No, this was something deeper. The kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon and warm bread. The girls had taken over the table, frosting cookies with too much sugar and too little precision. Lena moved between the oven and the sink, humming to herself, a streak of flour on her cheek. Her hair was pulled back with a ribbon Ellie had insisted she wear. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching. He didn't say much anymore during moments like these. Words weren't necessary. Everything he'd wanted to say for years was happening. In front of him, alive, breathing, laughing. The house was finished. Not polished, not perfect, but lived in. The table was scratched again, already marked with the evidence of real life. Forks dropped, elbows leaned, drawings done without permission. And it was beautiful. The plaque above the door, the light in. The kitchen gleamed softly in the lamplight. Ethan's hand brushed the wood every time he passed it, not out of habit. Out of gratitude. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, tucked into beds with matching quilts and matching dreams, Ethan and Lena stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the yard. The promise tree stood beneath a layer of snow, the red string still tied around its branch. The cardboard sign had been laminated by Harris's son, "Our family tree, now weatherproof, anchored in frost." Lena leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She wore one of his sweaters again. It was too big, swallowed her shape, but somehow she made it look like home. "This feels like something we never say out loud," she whispered. Ethan turned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this kind of peace. This kind of ordinary. It's so rare, so fragile, you don't dare name it. You just live in it, carefully." He nodded. "I keep waiting to lose it," she added. "You won't," he said softly. She looked up at him. He reached for her hand. I thought I didn't know how to love anymore, Ethan admitted. I thought what was broken in me would stay broken. Lena's voice trembled. Me too. But now? He looked around them. At the flickering candle, at the cooling cookies, at the quiet that wasn't empty anymore. I don't need forever, he said. I just need tomorrow and the day after that and every day you still want to be here. Lena squeezed his hand. Then we're choosing each other, one day at a time. No promises, Ethan said. Only the ones we grow, she whispered. They turned to look out the window again. Outside, snow began to fall, light, slow, timeless. It dusted the top of the promise tree. The wind passed through the bare branches like a lullaby. Inside, the only sound was the soft hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, and the warmth between two people who had lost everything once and found something better in what remained. The next morning, Ellie woke first. She tiptoed into the kitchen where the candle had burned low and found Ethan already up, mug in hand, watching the snow. She crawled into his lap, settled without a word. You're awake early, he said. She nodded sleepily, head against his chest. After a moment, she asked, Are we staying forever? Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out at the yard, at the tree, at the trail of tiny footprints that led from the porch to the swing. Then he kissed the top of her head and whispered, No one knows forever. But today, we're home. Maybe family isn't always blood. Maybe it's who shows up, who stays, who rebuilds with you, one quiet day at a time. If this story touched something in you, give it a like. Subscribe for more moments like this. Slow, real, and worth holding on to. We'll be right here with the light on.